For those that don't know who I am, my name is Jill Kohanek, and I direct the Athletic Leadership Master's program here at Springfield College. The title of today's event is Working with Today's Student Athletes, Insights and Strategies for Effective Coaching and Leadership. And we have a fantastic group of exemplary sport coaches, administrators, leaders, who are really going to provide a strength-based perspective on how to work with quote-unquote kids these days. And I want to emphasize that strength-based perspective. So we are really hoping that we're going to be able to have an honest conversation, both in this panel discussion, but also in the smaller breakout sessions that will follow from this panel discussion on the strategies to work effectively, lead effectively, the needs of young people these days, and also the strengths that they possess. So that's what we're looking forward to enjoying, and want to just give a thank you in advance for the panelists here before I introduce them this evening. So just a quick clap. A couple of thank yous as well to PEPSL and PEHE, the school and department under which our program is housed. And also want to, if you would stand, just acknowledge the graduate student committee who's put in countless hours to put together this program. Ben and Colin, Connor in the back, Grace over here, Eliza, and then Rachel, where are you? You staff member. Rachel also, Allmeyer, was invaluable to putting the program together. Yeah, a wave in the back there. So let me introduce the panel, and then we'll get to our moderated discussion, which will last about 45 minutes, and then we'll get into that breakout session that I mentioned, and I'll direct you to where those smaller breakouts will take place. The first person I'm really excited to introduce you to is a familiar face to this campus, and that's Pankil Chander. Pankil graduated from our athletic administration program last spring, and he's currently the head wrestling coach at Pennsylvania College of Technology. When I think of Pankil, I think about his desire to perform, his focus on performance, but just as much as he's focused on that, he's focused on developing student athletes. And he's broken several milestones in just his first year here related to performance on the mat. But he's also done some exceptional work in the vein of community service, in the vein of recruiting, and really creating a brand, the Wildcat Way, for his program. When he was at Springfield College, he also did some really exceptional scholarship and completed a Master's of Science, a thesis, looking at the link between winning percentage and diversity in terms of representation, both student athletes and coaches within college wrestling. So Pankil, we're excited to have you here, have you back. Welcome back to the community. Also a familiar face and community member is Dr. Adam Feit. Dr. Adam Feit is an assistant professor in the exercise science department, has a background both in strength and conditioning and sport and exercise psychology. So we love that marriage and are excited for you to bring insights related to that interdisciplinary approach. Along with having coaching experience in strength and conditioning from the professional to the youth level, Dr. Feit is also a co-business owner, owning TFP Performance, and that business is family-driven, is community-centered, and also brings in a lot of students to create internship opportunities. So really excited to have you, Dr. Feit. Our next guest is Kelsey Hunter, and Kelsey, I had to look down because I want to make sure I get your title correctly, all of the words, but I think it reflects the multi-dimensional perspective that Kelsey brings, the expertise that she has, wearing a lot of hats at Smith College as the Assistant Athletic Director in Equity, Inclusion, and Student Wellbeing. So really bringing together diversity, equity, inclusion, and student athlete development. Kelsey's background is in sports psychology. She went to Loughborough University in the UK, and so has that background, was a graduate of Smith College, and so is here with us in the Western Massachusetts region. So we're grateful to have you on campus, Kelsey. And then last but certainly not least, Pat Mediati, a familiar last name maybe for some of you. Most importantly, Pat is Colin's father, and a really accomplished physical educator, recently retired after over 42 years of service in physical education, is still currently strength and conditioning coordinator and special teams coach for the football team at Greenwich High School, and has also held various organizational leadership, administrative roles, is coordinating or overseeing the Hall of Fame for Greenwich High School, as well as having regional directing responsibilities for the NSCA. So thank you, Pat, for joining us as well. So with the intros out of the way, I'm going to sit down because this is going to be a conversation and ask a couple of questions. Let's make sure mics are on, mics are good. Awesome. All right, so the first question is for all of you. Feel free, whomever would like to respond first, just when you feel moved to respond. Talk to me a little bit about how your unique professional role in sport informs the way you both understand and work with today's student athletes.
I know how this works. You gotta get the first one out. Thank you, Dr. K. That's a great question. So, what's interesting about the role that I try to hold in many different layers is really the intersection of a confidant as a coach, but also somebody that's going to push our student athletes towards those limits. And I think we're in a unique position, speaking from the lens of high performance and strength and conditioning, to truly do what's best in the interest of the student athletes, but also to understand that we're also working with organizations, institutions, and really from the student athlete's perspective, other sport coaches. And so when we're looking at this idea of how to actually navigate those waters, we have to constantly have a checks and a balance system. And it can be very easy to go into a sport coaches meeting and hear maybe some of the gripes or complaints about so-and-so athlete or so-and-so situation. But like anything, we always know that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And so in my position, I always try to remember that and understand that I have really a dual role for what's also in the best interest of the team, but more importantly, the student, and to understand their perspectives, where they're coming from, and to truly bring both of those ideas together to create that ultimate victory. And that could be winning on the field, that could be winning off the court, whatever the case may be. So I really try to hold both roles very important and understand that it can be unique, it can be sticky, but it's what's needed most. Thank you.
Go for it. So in my role, like Dr. Gray said, I graduated from Smith in 2017, and I started working there in 2019, and kind of from the get-go, my position, my title, my position, how I kind of show up in my role is kind of to be the translator between the student athlete and the administration if they're not clicking. So like Dr. Gray said, my background's in sports psychology, so either the translator between the athlete and themselves, trying to figure out like what is missing, what's that missing piece. The translator, if the coach is not quite getting the athlete, if the athlete's not quite understanding why coach is making that decision. And I serve as a support role for the entire department. And the way I show up in that role, given my background, really kind of helps me think about like, what's not being talked about, what's not being said, and what's not being done, or kind of like what's the missing piece. Given the the context of whatever we're functioning in. So if an athlete, or I guess if a coach is missing kind of what an athlete is saying or doing, so I guess I can make an example. We have a pitcher on our softball team who is supposed to be an ace pitcher. She's supposed to be a strikeout pitcher, and she is walking about 45% of the batters that come in front of her. And the coaches initially he was kind of saying like, she needs to do her job. She's not doing her job. What's going on? She's just not doing her job. But in talking to that athlete, she is having some pretty intense anxiety and really dissociating as she's on the pitch or on the mound. And so trying to understand like what's happening, why are we missing that piece, what is bringing on this intense anxiety. And it's really a fear of her coach's response. It's a fear, it's not even really softball or pitching, it's a fear of how her coach is going to respond if and when she doesn't perform to her capacity. And so really my role is trying to bring out that athlete, given the context, and translate and talk to the coach and say like, okay, this is what she's afraid of. How do we work where she still understands that you have expectations and you understand that sometimes the way you convey those expectations is hurting her performance. So I use my role as having been a student athlete, my role as now being an administrator to kind of help the department flow and like see each other, meet each other where they are.
Okay, as a senior person at our high school, I not only have to work with children, but to me, the assistant coaches and the coaches are people that I also have to work with. So now not only do I interact with the kids, I have to interact with my staff, the staff, who are kids. Right. So how do we bring those two worlds together? As I see now, a lot of the staff, the young people that I have coming out of college and yourself, know a lot more supposedly than I do. They know a lot more, they tell me. But do they really know a lot more? I don't know. When it comes to a state championship game and you have an offensive coordinator who starts calling plays as if he was in the NFL, they think they know a lot more sometimes, but they really don't have the experience in the past. So my job, I felt it's kind of just imposed on me, or this is just the way it turned out, is to be the person that kind of bridges the gap. So I'm a gap bridger with the young staff who after a while kind of realize that maybe they don't know everything. Maybe they need to listen and just get a little bit from the past experience and understand why and what it's like to win. And my job is to make them winners, whether it's the kids or the staff. And it took a little while, and there was some transition. Some people left the staff who thought they know more than anyone else, and they went on to other places. Some kids would leave the school and to go somewhere else because they didn't go buy into the program. So my job, as I see it right now, and as your question went, is to be a moderator, a mediator, to bring both the old and the new, the senior and the new kids or coaches together, and maybe we can develop something to win. It's really interesting that I bring a lot of the past, and that past has changed. But the young people, you guys, girls, people out here, know a lot, probably more than we knew when we first started coaching. In fact, when I started to coach, you didn't have to be a player. They would hire people on staff that were hired because, well, they could also coach. And first thing they asked me to do was I was the equipment manager. First year I was an equipment manager. I taught driver ed. I was a coach, and I also was a teacher, 0.5. And I had to do all those things. Today they kind of, it's odd, but they kind of have stopped hiring teachers that also coach. It's interesting. We're losing a lot of our in-school teachers. They bring about a lot of help because they know the kids. So if you're in the building all day with a student, you kind of know who they hang out with. You know their friends. You know everyone, and it really gives you a good relationship with them. But now we have most of our coaches, I'd say 90%, from out of the school district. How do they have to get to know these kids if they're not in the building? So 4th and 1 on the 10-yard line, and we have to go and try to get them to score. Who am I going to depend on? Am I going to depend on someone I don't know because he did well in practice, or someone that I really know, maybe not as good an athlete, but I know that person has integrity. I can depend on that person. Interesting. So now you will have to, if you're not a teacher on staff, you'll have to work a lot harder to get to know the kids coming from the outside. So my past experiences have brought together me and the young guys. We get along. You know what? I've learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from you. We all learn a lot from each other. And they can do better than I can because they can relate to the kids. So I'm going into the weight room and they're quiet. And all of a sudden we get a young coach come in there and they put some music on, which I hate. In fact, there are some songs that come out, I want to just jump out the window. And the kids said, "Don't jump, coach, don't." I said, if the window opened, I'd be gone. there's some people that should be in prison that write these songs. It's really crazy. So anyway, we listen to this music, but the kids love it, and they're dancing in the weight room. So I went from playing, 1950s doo-wops to somebody who's now playing some up-tempo stuff, and I can play some stuff for you, what I play for the kids. They kind of like it, but that's not who they are. And it brought to me today, and I bring to them my past. And it's a nice transition. It's a nice combination of help. And we help each other. We've all learned from each other. So I think that that's something that we'll kind of make an emphasis later on. We had some talks.
I'd say for me, just because, as a head coach, I work directly with them, right? So I'm not maybe the mediator between a strength coach or sport coach or administrator. So my biggest thing is I don't want them to fear my response, right? Like I want to address all the elephants in the room. I've coached. I was a Division III wrestler. I coached at a small Division I program, and then an elite liberal arts college, and now I'm at a 4-year training technical school, and obviously coach at Springfield too. The one common denominator I've seen amongst every student athlete is that they want to be believed in, right? They want to be validated. They want to feel confident, and so my biggest thing is trying to relinquish control, right? One of the biggest things I learned in Springfield is kind of this idea of autonomy, supportive coaching, right? And so the more we can, my perspective is always trying to build autonomy in them. Obviously that happens quicker for some athletes than others, but that's ultimately, my perspective in working with today's student athlete. It doesn't matter what type of school they're at or what, sport they play. That's kind of what I've always boiled it down to. I think that there is, as a head coach, I've noticed that, even from an assistant to head coach, there's kind of a fear or an intimidation factor when the title changes. And that's been probably my number one goal, is to make sure that doesn't happen. I still want to be a very approachable, relatable head coach, and one of the biggest ways to do that is not always, inject feedback, but, ask more questions and give room for athletes to fail on their own too, because that's, ultimately how they get more engaged and learn. So obviously there's growing pains with that, right? Because you want to direct them in the right way, but that's kind of been my approach, and it's obviously helped build some great relationships with athletes. And it was my first year as a head coach. Like Jill said, we did have a lot of milestones, inherited a team, basically the same team as last year. We had our first winning dual record, first national qualifier, right? First time at the NCAA tournament. So the idea of kind of instilling confidence in guys and giving them room to fail, I think has been really, really important. And obviously expedites that trust building process, because that's a fundamental layer too.
So working from some of the points that were just shared about instilling confidence, trying to communicate and create a supportive space, but also, Dr. Fight, as you said, a space where there's optimal challenge. Talk to me about some of the strategies you use to create a psychologically safe environment where athletes can feel challenged, can feel like they can show up as their full self and really thrive.
Admit your mistakes. I think that's the biggest thing. Like as a leader, to admit your mistakes. I think when you get to a certain position, you want to maybe not be as vulnerable because you appear insecure, or you don't want to admit that you made a mistake because you might lose credibility, right? But again, I think it expedites trust and it shows that you're human if you can admit your faults, right? I think one of the pillars of psychological safety is like admitting fallibility, right? And so that's admitting mistakes. So I think that's really, really important. And then that kind of, gives your athletes permission to do the same. I think like I said, one of the toughest things is you don't want your athletes to hide things from you because they fear your response, right? And so I think if you can model that, example of fallibility, and you give those guys permission to do the same, and then, create a more psychologically safe environment in the process. So.
Curiosity and empathy are, I think, are the two best qualities that anyone can lead with. But I think really when it comes to being a leader, asking, I guess the two biggest questions I ask in my job are why and how can I support you? So I think it's not performing the way you want them to. Why? What's in their way? And how can you support them? Because like you said, they want to do well, they want to impress, they want to fulfill the expectations that are in front of them. And more times than not, if they opt into a thing, that it's not that they don't want to. It's not that they don't want to be there. And if they don't want to be there, why? Are they scared? Are they nervous? Are they afraid of failure? Are they afraid of success? That's actually what we have come up against a lot with our athletes. But really creating that space of psychological safety where they can bring anything to you and say, I'm not performing to my capacity, or this is coming into practice today, and I can't leave it on the sideline. I can't, you have to see them as a whole human. So as opposed to jumping to conclusions, creating your own narrative around what they're bringing to you as a leader, asking why, or asking even yourself why, or asking them, how can I support you? 9 times out of 10, the kid knows what they need or knows what kind of support they're looking for. They just need it to come from somebody else, because you listen way more to somebody else than you listen to yourself. So most often the kids do the job for me when I ask, how can I support you? And they know, I just need to vent, or I need you to tell me how to talk to coach, or I need you to tell me how to help. I need you to help me through the situation. And then we end up kind of doing it collaboratively. I throw paint at a wall. I'm like, does this stick? Is this going to stick? This has worked for some. Research says this works for some. It might not work for you, and I will not be offended if you come back to me and say, Kelsey, that sucked. I didn't like that. Then we go back to the drawing board, because I come to it from a place of empathy and curiosity. Why didn't that work? It's okay. Thank you for telling me that didn't work. Or thank you for telling me that you're really stuck in the situation. How can I help?
When I started, the head coach was very unapproachable. I see that today. Most head coaches are now more like the assistant coaches of the past. I think that's great. I never was able to, if we had to talk to the head coach, you would actually be afraid there was a problem. There's no way you should be talking to the head coach. The assistant coaches, however, are still the same, as they were. And those are the people that you go to as a student. Our job is to have no negatives. And as a strength coach, we have a rule in our weight room: there are no negatives. Never say anything that anyone did anything wrong. You can just do it better. So we try to stay away from negatives, and we want to create success. The best way to get kids, student athletes, to participate and be successful is to make them successful. So we have a record board in the room that for the first 3 months we don't put anyone's name on, because we want them to get better just individually. How can you make yourself better? There's no one to compare yourself with. So we'll take all those old records down and we'll create a new one as we go on. I think that's important. It's important. So making them successful and making them believe it. Now they'll say to me, Coach, I work out with my personal trainer. And this is the biggest problem we have, overtraining. So my job is to say, listen, our program is better than their personal trainers who was overtraining you. Now we have some shin splints. We have a girls lacrosse coach who has the kids doing 50 plyo jumps on concrete every day. Like 50 jumps. They all had shin splints. So I said, guys and girls, you gotta stop this. So our program, we have one program for guys and girls. Everyone in the entire school does the same program, just different modifications. We live 4 days a week, and we stress individual success. Now, when we give them success, and I promised them, I said, my job is to make you 100 pounds stronger than you were the first day you came into the fitness center. And they said, oh yeah, sure. By the time they're seniors, they are, guys and girls, everybody, whoever comes in. I said, well, how did that happen? Well, when you do that and they see that you're creating results, they buy in. And now what you have is a group of people who are never going to leave your side. They believe in you. They have loyalty, and you've created a culture. And that's our biggest role in creating a culture. And I see that at Springfield College. I got some of my ideas from this group, and Brian and some of the strength coaches from the NCAA. If you believe in it and you make it work and you show them that it's successful, they will be. You've got them for life.
I'll wrap this one up. I got 3 things that I was thinking about that really inspired by our panelists here. So the first thing, in regards to creating psychological safety and that environment where our student athletes can thrive is an approach that's solutions focused and it's strengths based. If you've taken sports psychology for the non-sports psych majors in here, we've talked about that quite a bit. But I distinctly remember early on in my coaching career, when I was 24 years old, I was a head coach in a very toxic culture where, as Coach just alluded to, no negatives. That's all I was looking for. We were in a bad position. We were the worst team in the entire nation. And my job was the enforcer, to find all the things that were wrong. And when we reflect on the value and the role of a coach, we think oftentimes it's there to correct, it's there to critique. It's there whether you walk in the weight room or you walk out onto the field or court, what are the things that are wrong because I'm being paid to fix them. And once I stepped outside of that culture and went back to school, shout out to Springfield College, for that I was able to really understand that what are they already doing really well? And how can we, as coaches and administrators and teachers, get them to do more of that? We are in an incredible place, we are incredible people, and rather than continue to harp on the things that they know they can't do, and I can see them struggling with what they can't do, what are they already doing? And if they're doing that in one area of their life, and let's take a skill like time management, and they're not doing really well with that skill in time management, in another area of their life, how can we leverage the skills that they've used? If you're already doing it for your athletics, how can we do that with meal prep? How can we do that with homework and whatnot? So adapting to a strengths-based, more solutions-focused approach has really helped. Number two, I've said this a lot to my students and student athletes. As a coach, it's very easy and it's very, I think, expected of all of us to give feedback when we're on the clock. You are in class, we say, good job. We're at practice, we say, that's a nice job. Focus on this, try not to focus so much on that. And I think when we stop there, whether it's 9 to 5 or 4 to 6, whatever the case may be, the magic can really happen there. So I was saying, it's reaching out when you've clocked out. If I see something that recognizes a victory for one of my students or student athletes, it could be 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday at the grocery store, it could be 7 o'clock at night when I'm at watching my son's baseball game. If I see something that is reminded of something that one of my students or student athletes has done or is going through, I let them know. And I reach out after I've essentially clocked out of my day job. And maybe it's my business experience, the business we were running before we came back up here for school, but that subtle touch, that genuine touch, getting them to realize they're thinking about me when they don't have to. They're truly, I'm on their mind, and it's a genuine. And you'd be surprised of how deep those relationships can go when all of a sudden a billboard on 91 or an interaction with somebody on campus reminded me of you. And lastly, and Dr. K, you brought this up in terms of the confidence, but the idea of safety is how can we microdose their mastery experiences? Confidence and efficacy and their belief in their ability to do the things in specific situations. Oftentimes, what we may ask of you is very difficult. And it's a very easy progression or regression. And I've learned this through work in behavior psychology. The use of a simple scaling question on 1 to 10. How much do you believe in your ability to do this on a scale of 1 to 10? If you or I am not saying an 8 or above, what we're asking you to do is way outside your comfort zone. And how can we shrink the tasks that we're asking you to do? How can we go, if that was a 2, well, how come it wasn't a 1? If it was a 4, well, how come it's not a 6? What do I need to do, and how can we microdose or regress it as needed to get you to do the thing? Because over time, just like everything else happens, we progressively overload all of our life experiences. That's why math gets harder. That's why grad school is a little bit different than your first year classes. And so if we can remember that to create those experiences, that's what sets us up for long-term success. We shouldn't be maxing you out every single day, but we're slowly microdosing those situations to help you build that mastery. And once you do that, you build that confidence. And then from there, if you have the abilities and you have the confidence, well then you're pretty close to being unstoppable.
I'd write that down. Reach out when you clock out. Sticky. Next question for all of you. Can you share a moment where you weren't effective in meeting the needs of a student athlete or a group, a team, and what did you learn from that experience?
The exact opposite of my last answer. I assumed what they needed. I was working with has a hard time keeping her frustrations to herself in a game. And I assumed what she needed, and you can tell when someone's just checked out of a conversation, and I could have been talking to a brick wall. She was not receiving what I was talking about. She was giving me kind of like the surface level, yep, I can do that, sure, answers. And I was not getting to her, and luckily I realized it in the same interaction, and I stopped and I said, we need to backtrack. I'm not clicking. This is not actually what you need, or I'm reading that you're not receiving what I'm saying in a way that like it would be helpful to you. How can I help? How can I support you? What do you need to work on? And she gave me the answer. She gave me the beginning, I guess, the beginning part of the answer that I could then just help her bring home, close the loop. And it really took that, my ability to like read her and read the situation. And I think in terms of what creates a autonomy supported, psychologically safe space is to be able to backtrack and apologize. And I am a huge proponent of calling out what's happening. The best way to take the awkwardness out of a situation is to say, you're not picking up what I'm doing, right? This is not actually something that you can go home and do. What can we do? Or, I apologize, I said that wrong. Let me try to rephrase. I think there's no harm in editing what you're doing. And I think the more we don't realize what we've done, or we realize what we've done and don't change it and try to like just stick with it and just hope we can get through this interaction, the more harm we do of varying degrees, hopefully, well, the least amount of harm possible, but sometimes not. And so, yeah, I definitely was not serving her in a supportive way, and I just had to pump the brakes and realize what was happening. And that's actually what started my practice of asking, how can I support you? Or like, how can I help? Because assuming what people need, I wouldn't say 9 times out of 10, but more often than not, you're going to assume wrong.
I had 3 kickers who hated me 2 years ago. Colin knows who they were. And they were the most difficult athletes in the world because they thought they knew everything. And what I got emotional. And I think my thought is that I needed to not be emotional. And when you get emotional and you start yelling at kids, and you're screaming at them because they brought you to the edge that you wanted to not coach anymore. And finally, be facetious there, but they just brought me to the end. So what I had to do was take a step back. And as coaches, when I first started coaching, basically a coach would tell you what to do, and they never tell you why. They just said, this is what we're doing because I said so. And so, well, now kids need to know why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that as a coach, as I progress, you learn that you don't do anything unless it's either research-based or you tell them why you're doing it, and there's a reason. And when you prove to them that what you talk about has a purpose and a reason, then you can kind of get to them. So with these 3 kickers, after they're done fooling around every day, and I had to constantly be on them, we kind of came to a place where I was able to just put that beside me. And I watched an episode of Ted Lasso. You ever seen Ted Lasso?
Yes.
The way it really was, and I did this before Ted Lasso, I'm going to take credit for it, but he came out. But I actually did what he did, and I just ignored them. And they got so crazed. And they finally came up to me and they said, Coach, what's wrong? Are you mad at us? I said, I don't know. Just do what you want to do. Whatever. And they couldn't deal with it. And they finally came around. It was a hard battle. Real hard battle. I had to bench them at times during the game. And just teach them what you would like to have them do, but give them a little bit of empowerment. So I put them in charge of certain drills. I put them in charge of things. And they started to come into play. So just teach them what they have to know because there's a reason, and don't get emotional.
I'll give a shout out here to Dr. Brian Thompson, our Director of Strength and Conditioning, for this one. I would say pretty much every time before I was a father was a bad time in coaching. And if a family is in your cards, and I'll never forget what he said, there was a time many years ago, said something along the lines of, every person you coach is somebody's child. And you hear that when you're 21 and you just get graduated, you get a certification, you get a big time job, and yeah, no big deal. And then you say what you mean, and you mean what you say, because there's no, repercussions, or that's how it is. And then for me, I became a parent. And when I started to go through that process, so I have 2 children, ages 10 and 8, so for the better first half of my career, I heard it, but I wasn't really listening, if that makes sense. I understood what he was saying, but it never really clicked. And then my son started to play youth sports, and then I started taking a little bit more of a critical eye of how they were managing practice, or how they were letting the 5-year-olds just run all over them, which I laughed pretty hysterically in my car. But in terms of what was being said, what was not being said, asking my kids how practice was, what did they learn, what skills were they working on, and then watching those interactions unfold with my son and our daughter, and I saw it from a completely different lens. And I started to internalize the things that weren't said or the things that were said, and I started to get upset at my kids' coaches, whether they were volunteer or paid, whatever the case may be. So in terms of letting my athletes down, I do still find myself, when I visit with old athletes or check in with them on Instagram or social media, what have you, and I think about the times where I wish I took a different approach. I wish I said something maybe a little bit more polished. I wish, like Coach said, I took some time and I embraced the pause in between what happened and what was going to happen next. But for me, that was a really big tipping point once I understood that every person I come across now is the child of somebody else. And now that I have a child, and I have 2 of them, I always remember about the impacts of our words and our actions and how that can trigger certain thoughts and feelings. And like Coach said, the behaviors, whether they act out or they act in, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I think similar to that, mistakes was always, and our Springfield wrestling guys know, is when I've been too direct or too intense, right, in certain moments. And I think, those come in a lot of different ways, right? But you want to give direct feedback, and for some kids, that we always think that they need brutal honesty, but like I said, there's always a way to be more polished. There's always a way to be maybe less direct, and they can still land and they can be reached, right? And so that's typically, I'd say, anytime I've made a mistake in meeting the needs, is just sometimes what kids need is just to give them room to, do what they need to on their own, and if that means they have to fail on their own, you're going to support them through that. But sometimes the best way for them to learn is to kind of do it on their own. But yeah, I think that's, I'm not a father, right? But it is a very powerful way to think about how you're communicating with an athlete when you realize they are someone's kid, and how that can land. And obviously for me as a college coach, right, I'm recruiting the kid, I'm recruiting the family, so you develop a really good relationship with those parents through that process. So you're always forthright with them, and when you're recruiting them about, we are going to have some hard conversations, and there's going to be some objective truths that I put in front of you that you're going to have to confront at some point. But the way you deliver that can really make a big difference, and sometimes can even make a break and be a deal breaker for whether that kid continues in the sport, right? So the coach said this, like that carries a lot of weight, right? So and I think I realize that even more as a head coach now, just because the buck stops with you, right? And so it carries a lot of weight, and those 2 words Coach said can be really powerful. So you have to be really mindful, if for any coaches, even administrators in here, right? Really mindful about how you're delivering feedback, because it can stay with the kid for years, right? So.
Not only do you have the idea of you having children, but as you get older, you're going to have kids that you've had their parents as players, and you've had their grandparents as players. I have kids that I'm coaching that I coach their grandparents. So as you get to know the family and you get to know that, it makes a big deal. It's a big deal. It's like you're part of this thing. It's bigger than yourself, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is a pretty neat situation, because I not only have my kids, as you become aware of that, and that's a big item, but you also have their kids and their grandkids. Oh my gosh! And right now, if I have anybody's great grandkids, I'm going to quit.
All right, so it's just about breakout time. I'm going to give you some instructions for how we're going to move. So in a second here, There are 4 different breakout